Hey everybody, today I'm going to talk about the new book from Baker Academic, Pauline, Theology as a Way of Life by Joshua Jipp. Thank you to Baker for sending me a copy for review. This is going to be my honest reaction to this book. I'll step through my typical format here, my book reviews with summarizing the main idea of this work, talking about the research behind it, talking about the readability of the style, and then ending on just my general takeaways in the form of my kind of reaction to the book as a whole. So let's jump into this one, Pauline Theology as a Way of Life. Joshua Jipp is someone that I've heard referred to. This book was very explicitly recommended by Michael Bird, who's someone that I follow and enjoy, and that was kind of how it jumped onto my radar. But Joshua Jipp is not somebody I've followed too closely, although I've known his name in kind of New Testament studies circles for some time. But I was really intrigued. I'm going to say a lot about this. This is going to be a big theme in the video, but I was really intrigued by the positioning of this book. And so let me comment on the main idea. What Joshua Jipp is doing here is, this book is a theology of Paul, or a kind of a synthesis of Paul's theology in a way, but it's not taking a big swing at proposing a comprehensive Pauline theology. It's more so taking Paul's voice and situating Paul's take on humanity and what it looks like for humans to flourish in this world and in this life. It's kind of taking his voice in that conversation, what does it look like to live a good life, and putting that in conversation with an ancient view of the good life and a modern view of the good life. So he puts Paul into conversation with some ancient philosophy, notably things like Stoicism and Epicureanism. And then he puts Paul in conversation with modern positive psychology. So ancient wisdom, traditions about what a good life looks like, and then a more modern psychological kind of, I wouldn't say tradition because it's relatively recent, but a modern take, I guess, a scientific and psychologically infused take on what a good life looks like. So what would it look like then to look at a kind of a holistic view of Paul and Paul's lens on humanity and life in the world in juxtaposition with those two other kind of lenses formed by ancient traditions and then modern positive psychology. That's what Pauline theology as a way of life is about, is kind of comparing and contrasting these visions and then asking the question, what does Paul's vision have to say and have to bring to bear on this? And he does do sub-themes. He talks about a lot about transcendence, like Paul's he kind of summarizes each of the big three buckets, and then he breaks apart into subtopics that each bucket, so to speak, each stream talks about, like a transcendence, or what's the ultimate vision of the good life, what are practices that a flourishing human will engage in, what about relationships and community, and then there's a chapter kind of on each sub-theme that juxtaposes Paul with the other two voices. So that's what this book is doing. It's a very interesting angle, but that's the main idea. So quickly on the research about this. So this is because this is one of those books that doesn't super neatly fit into any one category. So the research also doesn't neatly fit into any one category. But what Joshua Jipp is doing here is doing a lot of research on all of the things I just said. So it's obviously a lot about Paul. So there's a lot of biblical work here, some exegetical work. There's a lot of referencing other Pauline theologies or other theologians who have done kind of works, holistic works on Paul's theology. So there's kind of that whole angle on the book, kind of a breadth of what Paul has written and scholarship on Paul. Then there's this stuff about ancient philosophies, Epicureanism, Stoicism notably. And so there's a good bit of, there's an early chapter that summarizes those really, really ancient and really broad and general traditions on what they said about the good life. And then there's also the whole positive psychology world. So he does a lot of interaction with people like Jonathan Haidt, for example, in the happiness hypothesis, and a lot of more modern voices. Norman Vincent Peale kind of figures into that more recently on a popular side, at least. But yeah, he also is reading a lot of positive psychology and some Christian voices that kind of overlap a little bit with positive psychology, but he's also trying to get his handle on that. So it's really broad areas of research, and the book's not super long, and so he does kind of chapter summaries of those really big traditions, and then he does those sub-chapters on those sub-themes, rather, that take a facet of Paul and then link it and draw distinctions between those other traditions. So it's a big swing research wise, and he does a pretty good job, I have to say. Like it's pretty wide ranging research. There's a lot. I mean, this is under Baker's academic imprint, and there is an academic feel to this book because of the amount of reading and research that went into the background, building up the background of it, and kind of like it feels like, especially those early chapters, feel kind of like having multiple literature reviews. Actually, if you've ever read literature reviews and dissertations and stuff, you'll know what that feels like. So this one's trying to wrap its arms around pretty big unwieldy topics, but he does a pretty good job. I'll say more in my reaction about ways that I wish there was maybe some more depth, but yeah, there's a lot of tension around that because he's trying to do a lot and summarize and synthesize a lot and keep it short. But pretty impressive job research-wise. Readability-wise, this skews towards an academic reading style. It's not highly academic in terms of there's no like reading Greek, for example, when you're reading the sections on Paul specifically, or even the ancient traditions, Epicureanism and stuff. There is a lot of primary citations with those, he quotes people like Cicero and Marcus Aurelius and stuff like that, but it's not academic in the sense of like you need to have a concordance or something with you to be able to read that stuff. It skews academic because of the depth of research, but the style of it is, I would say this is like upper undergraduate level reading, maybe like an upper class, junior, senior, undergraduate class kind of style of reading is where I would maybe put this. So not intro, not like easy breezy, but also not, I did not at all find it inscrutable or difficult to parse what he's getting at. A lot of the, it's helped by his jumping into, I think the book is organized really well, and then he also constantly is doing the comparisons between what Paul says and what positive psychology says, and so that kind of helps you get a handle on the argument overall. So it's well put together. It's not, the reading style didn't blow my socks off, but it was very, very competent, very, very well done for what this project is trying to do. So that's the readability of it. Hopefully that helps you orient yourself to the book. Now, okay, my reactions to this. So my reactions are, you can break my reaction in kind of two things, two sub reactions, I suppose. On the one hand, I love the positioning of this book. I love the goal of this book. I absolutely love what this book is trying to do. I'll loop back to that and end on that because I want to end on the more positive side. On the other hand, I struggled a little bit. So that was my positive reaction. My more struggled reaction was I constantly was wanting more depth, I suppose, because he's balancing these very disparate and very ancient and very big philosophies of Epicureanism alone, just trying to wrap your mind around that, let alone adding Stoicism in there. And then that's not even all the ancient philosophies he talks about. And then let alone just even trying to summarize what positive psychology, which is its own diverse, broad thing, let alone trying to have a, synthesis of Paul. I mean, each of these things, and maybe it's just because I read too much in a sense that I just kept thinking like, wow, there's so many other directions that this could go, or like this one chapter on like for example, I really liked this chapter, but there's one chapter on transcendence. So like what his argument is like, here's Paul's vision of transcendence, which is union with God in Christ, which I love that positioning. And then he juxtaposes that with, here is what the ancients talked about, how did they root the telos of humanity in some sort of transcendence, or did they not? And then how does positive psychology do or do not do the same thing? I absolutely love all of those questions, and I really liked that chapter, but that could so easily be a multi-volume series just of books on just that, and that's just one chapter in this relatively short book. So I kept bumping up against like, wow, I love these questions, and I love how he's positioning Paul in these other voices. But I want some more. And so I kind of had that feeling a lot in this book. And I'm just putting my reaction out there. You can judge if you would have a similar reaction or not, or if you want the more synthesis kind of style of reading. It's not even per se a bad thing about the book exactly. It's more of just how I felt reading it, partly because the questions are so good, and partly because I love the premise of the book so much, which I'll get into that as my last thing I'll say about it. When I was in seminary, as I was reading this book, I was like pinching myself, because when I was in seminary, I wrote a paper in a class on Paul that was kind of this book, just very like much more shallow and much less developed and much less effective than what this book is. But I wrote a book, and I titled it Was Paul a Humanist? And I was trying to get at like a vision of humanism in terms of how do humanists believe that humans can flourish in the world, and how would Paul overlap or part ways with that. So I say that to say I very much love this way of thinking about especially Paul as kind of a philosopher thinker in history. I love thinking about like getting out of the in the weeds theological wrangling around Paul's views of justification or soteriology, or like just parking all that stuff momentarily, getting our head out of that, and then thinking about, okay, how do philosophers and how do especially modern people think about humans experiencing flourishing, and then re-entering Paul's corpus and thinking, what would he have to say to bring to bear on all of those? I absolutely love that. I think that is one of the most interesting ways to approach figures like Paul or Scripture more generally. So I 100% endorse and love the premise of this book, and I love the direction of it. I loved his discussions of transcendence. I loved his discussions of the role of suffering and adversity in human flourishing. There's so much I loved about what the book is doing. And so I like heartily recommend this in terms of, I think it's a fantastic project. It's fantastically positioned. I wish there were more people writing like this. I wish there were more books like this. I'm like totally cheering for it, and I love that Joshua Jipp is thinking this way. We need more scholars thinking this way. My only wrinkle is what I said earlier about coming up to the limitations of the project that does take such a big swing. And I offer that as open-handedly, not as a critique of the book per se, because within the parameters of what he's trying to do and probably what Baker Academic's trying to do with it, I think it does do quite well and it's quite successful. Maybe it's because it taps on such a deep, like, kind of area of passionate interest and excitement for me. I just wanted more. So, that might be on me to just do more deep reading on it, and follow the footnotes that are really well cited here to go to deeper sources. But that was my reaction. So I wanted to put my honest reaction out here. So I love the premise. I love the project. I love what he's doing here. I just wanted more depth in especially certain facets of it. But I'm keeping this book. I'm definitely going to recommend it to certain people that I know, and would highly encourage anyone watching this, if this sounds of interest to you, I would highly encourage you to pick up a copy of Pauline Theology's Way of Life by Joshua Jipp. Thank you, as always, for taking some time to watch.